I don't know, the idea that they would be suffering that much is devastating. She says, I just hate myself. Like, I am such a burden to the world that even if that were to happen, me not being around would be better than the burden that I bring to the world.
Dr. Blaise Aguirre, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, for having me on. You're such an inspiration yourself, so I'm sure that this will be a manifestation of just all the work that you do, and hopefully the work I do.
I have been looking forward to this since I read your book 3 weeks ago and
Mhm.
ultimately had it stolen away from me by the lady on the airplane next to me. But if you and I were to meet at a cocktail party outside of Boston some
Mhm.
evening, and I asked you, Dr. Blaise, what do you do for a living? How do you
Mhm.
respond to that?
I mean, I think it also depends on the audience. I mean, the short answer is that I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Sometimes what happens when I answer that is, wait a second, are you analyzing me? Or they introduce me to their spouse and say, honey, you need to speak to this guy. But, sometimes, that's about as far as it gets. And then if they're more interested, I'll say that I tend to work with teenagers who struggle with whether they should live or not. They
Mm,
struggle with thoughts of suicide. And unfortunately, many of the young people that we treat are young people who have made suicide attempts, are seriously considering suicide. And I mean, suicide is just one of those devastating outcomes of many mental health conditions. Uh, but certainly that in young people to me is devastating. I've got four of my own kids and I've seen them grow and I don't know, the idea that they would be suffering that much is devastating.
Reading your book brought me to a position of profound humility for those who suffer and struggle to that degree. And I do want to unpack that with you today
Hmm. Hmm.
and have our audience tune in for it. I'm going to back up a little bit from the cocktail party in Boston,
Sure.
do a little bit of your origin story. You grew
Hmm.
up near me outside of
Hmm.
Indiana. That's where you were
Hmm.
born. And then over to
Hmm.
Europe you went and then down to South Africa. So
Hmm. Hmm.
a lot of globe trotting for a young person. How did
Yeah.
all that movement from a young age impact your worldview as a child? Like, how did you see the world differently through all
Yeah.
those travels
Yeah.
that maybe I did as a kid who grew up and still reside in St. Louis?
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that happened just like traveling around is that, when we were living in Spain, for instance, my cousins were Spanish. All I knew were Spanish-speaking people. And we moved to South Africa. There was a lot of, that was during the time of apartheid. So there was a lot of segregation at the time. And during my medical school years, there's started to be more integration and just seeing the impact of the kinds of policies that kept people apart. And then, coming to the United States, going to Notre Dame, and many of my dearest friends were people who came from very, very small Midwestern communities. So if I was talking about Paris or Cape Town, South Africa, or Madrid. These were names on a geography map,
Right.
but there was no sense of what that actually meant. Some of the tastes, customs, traditions, and all of that. So, I think that I was exposed to the idea very early on that people have very, very different lives all over the world and different ways of viewing the world.
Mhm.
And sometimes that would be problematic for me because I would see a rigidity in thinking that I'd say, well, okay, that's one point of view, but there are other points of view. And at the same time, that is the point of view of the person who has the point of view. So I think it expanded the way that I saw the world in ways that people who are very isolated don't necessarily.
I believe you're the oldest of eight. The
I
reason
am.
why you moved so much is for your father's business and his work.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I've read several times in several interviews that one of your heroes, maybe the most influential person in your life,
Mhm.
is your mom.
Mhm.
Talk about your mother.
My mom, her mom had died when she was young. My grandfather was the Spanish ambassador to the Kennedy White House and then to the Vatican. And she was recruited to the Spanish, some people would think about it, the Catholic, some people would think of it as a little bit, off the mainstream, but the Opus Dei. And And when we went to South Africa, she started to challenge some of the ideas of Opus Dei, and she felt that that her faith was perhaps more mainstream, and so she left the order. But immediately I saw a challenging of a way of thinking. Then when we got to South Africa, and she saw some of the worst elements of apartheid, and she would stand up. Having come from a very aristocratic family, she would stand up for the person who is being oppressed. And so she would challenge whatever the mainstream thinking is. And that was always, but it was always done with tremendous compassion. It was not only a love for the person who was being oppressed, but also thinking that the oppressor was not necessarily doing it out of malice, but that there was an ignorance that that person was kind of acting out of. But the part of it that I think was the most powerful thing is she said to me this. She says, "We don't know neither the time nor the place of the second coming." So she says, "The way in which I live is I treat everybody as if they were the Christ, because we don't know the time or the place. If I'm wrong, well, I've treated someone kindly.
Yes.
But if I'm right, I'm going to be sitting in a very nice place up in heaven." So she had this eternal compassion for
Mm.
people, and I just never saw her like hate anyone, and it was just such a loving model of interacting with people. She didn't like everyone all the time, but she loved people. So.
Mm. So to my left, as you look at me to the right, there's a picture of Martin Luther King Jr.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite quotes from him is, "It's hard for me to like the man who's kicking me in the head when I'm on the ground." And then he wrote,
Mhm.
and then I realized I don't have to like him. I just have to
Mhm.
love him.
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
your mother is onto something. I know what many of your siblings have gone on to do in their lives and how compassionate they lead
Mhm.
forward. But today's
Mhm.
episode is with you. So I
Oh,
want to talk
yeah.
about your work and your desires as a young
Brilliant.
person. What did you imagine doing as you grew up? What was your dream as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old?
I love the way that the mind works, and I was going to be a philosopher. So Pascal, or even Nietzsche, or Bertrand Russell, any of these great philosophers, I thought that this is what I'm going to do. And actually, when I went to Notre Dame, I enrolled in a philosophy course. So I wanted to, I just wanted to think. It was one of those things. The only thing is, it soon became clear to me that people with philosophy majors were either teaching philosophy or delivering pizzas, and that I needed to do something else with this. And I also thought, I mean, okay, you could have philosophy, but not everybody thinks in the same way. And what happens if a person is struggling with depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, trauma, or something like that? How is the impact on their mind going to, what's the impact on their mind going to be? But not only that, that it's a tremendous privilege to be able to sit around and just think. Most people are trying to survive. They're trying to get through the day. They're trying to feed themselves, their kids, just make it so that it's another good day under their belt. And so it just seemed somewhat frivolous. And then from psychology, I thought, okay, but what if there were like an infection in the brain, and I thought, okay, maybe I should also go to medical school and then study psychiatry.
So you go to Wits University. I would imagine a few of our listeners know exactly where that is and some don't. Tell us about Wits University.
Yeah, Wits University, it's University of the Witwatersrand. It is a massive university in Johannesburg, South Africa, and they have great schools of education in all the major domains, law, engineering, business, etc. But they have a fantastic medical school, and they really accepted, only the top students who graduated every year. We have a strong competition with the University of Cape Town. They tend to think that they're better than Wits, but we know we're the Notre Dame to their Michigan. So,
Thank you for keeping it real. Now we Americans understand exactly what you're talking about again. You eventually graduate, change, come back to the United States, go to Boston University for residency.
Mhm.
We could spend all day in your resume. It
Mhm.
is fascinating what you've
Mhm.
done. But let's jump directly into Three East.
Mhm.
For
Mhm.
our friends who don't yet know what Three East is, tell us what you helped form.
Yeah, I joined the Harvard faculty in 2000 and McLean Hospital in 2000. And McLean Hospital is probably the best known freestanding psychiatric hospital in the United States. For many people who don't know McLean Hospital, it's very well known because it's where Girl Interrupted took place. And nevertheless, it's an incredible institution. And I was working in the child and adolescent service. And one of the things that I saw is a lot of young people coming in with suicidality. They would come in, we would treat them, and then they would leave the hospital a week later, 10 days later. But then they would come back again, and they would come back again, and they would come back again. And this was different from maybe a kid who was having school problems or who was having maybe an episode of minor depression. Um, they were really struggling with suicidality. And one of the things that bothered me was, whatever's going on in their life is causing them to be suicidal. They then come to the hospital. Is it that we're just simply taking them out of the things that is causing that kind of suicidal experience, whether it's a home environment, school environment, who knows what it is?
Yeah.
And they settle down, and then we're just putting them right back in there. We're saying the child doesn't know how to swim. They're drowning. We take them out of the swimming pool. They start breathing again, and we throw them back into the swimming pool, but they still don't know how to swim. And so I thought, like, there must be a different way of doing this. And at the same time, a very famous psychologist, Marsha Linehan, had developed this treatment known as dialectical behavior therapy, which really targets suicidal behavior and self-destructive behavior in people. It hadn't been done as much with young people, but we then decided to develop a service for young people who were struggling with severe suicidality and self-destructive behaviors. At McLean Hospital, and in 2007, we opened the doors to 3 East. Nothing magical about the name. It was on the third floor of East House. So we called it 3 East. But yeah, and then since that time, we've treated about 5,000 young people who suffer in this way, and they've come from all over the world.
I want to unpack what you do with these young people, but I think why our listeners will pull their chair ups even closer is when they understand the outcome that you're
Mhm,
experiencing so far with these 5,000 plus young people.
mhm,
So in general population, I believe that the idea of suicide ideation will lead to a suicide in about 10% of those who've been served. Is that accurate? So more than 500 of these young
mhm,
people would ultimately attempt to take their
mhm.
own life.
Right. So, in the group of people that we treat, again, there weren't that many comparison studies because we were the first to start this residential treatment center for suicidal kids. So the extrapolation comes from an equivalent group of adults with this degree of suicidality, and these adults were, 18 and older, and that those adults followed over the years show about 10% would eventually die by suicide. Um, and that, so if we were just to use those numbers, I mean, we've been open to 2007, so 18 years, that of the 5,000 people, that if those statistics are also true for young people, that about 500 would have completed suicide.
And
Um,
instead, what are you showing?
yeah. And again, like we don't know absolutely everybody, but to as far as we know in terms of follow-up, fewer than 30 have taken their life.
Right. Um, so we could spend the rest of the podcast talking about those 30 and
Right.
the agony in their lives and the agony in their family's life forever and what it's like for you to love these young people
Yeah.
and then ultimately to lose these young people. We'll come back to that at the end because I think grief is something we should wrestle with and do so unapologetically. But I want to celebrate the success that you're having.
Mm.
You wrote a book that I was honored to read. I read it on a flight 3 weeks ago, and I've never read a book that had more people looking over at me a second time, then a third time, then a fourth time. And then eventually, even a woman looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" So tell our listeners and our viewers about the cover of the book, and then tell us why
Mhm.
you named it such.
Hmm. Hmm. So, so Well, first of all, when I was thinking about the 30 who'd unfortunately taken their life, I thought, like, what is the common theme here? And and there was something that kept coming up that really psychiatry was not addressing, and that was the idea of a level of self-dissatisfaction that bordered on self-hatred, and in fact, that people then that led to self-hatred, and that people lived with, independent of whether their other mental health symptoms had been addressed or not. So even when they weren't depressed or anxious, that there was this core self-hatred. And uh, I I just felt like, if self-hatred is so central to, it was a common theme in these 30 young people, um, we have to address this self-hatred. But there was absolutely nothing out there that addressed self-hatred. So over the years, I've been, taking notes and writing narratives and writing stories about, the people who experience self-hatred. And eventually, I remember I was meeting with this young woman, and she said, like, I just don't think I'm going to make it. I said, well, what happens if your mood improves and your anxiety improves? She says, I just hate myself. Like, I am such a burden to the world that even if that were to happen, me not being around would be better than the burden that I bring to the world. And so I said, listen, we ha this is not going to happen. You and I are going to work on this, and I want to write a book about this. And by then I had the collective stories of many other patients who struggled in this way. So I submitted the idea to, I'd written 19 books, but this to me was my most important book. And I submitted the idea to a publisher who were a bit skeptical because they, normally if you're going to do a book on basketball, they're going to compare it to other basketball books, or on self-growth, they're going to do it to other self-growth books. There's always going to be a comparison. But
Mm.
there was no comparison for this book. And so a bit skeptical, but I submitted my material and they said, okay, we'll do this. And the one thing that we didn't have is a title for the book. And so they, they started coming up with a lot of ideas for the book. And many of them were the type of sort of pop psychology
Right.
or highfalutin language that spoke to learning how to love yourself, or overcome your worst self, or something like. And when I spoke to my patients about this, they said they wouldn't buy that book. I said, why not? This because that's not what the experience is. So I kept going back, and so the book was nearly finished. They were saying, what are we going to call it? And eventually, one of the editors said, well, what do your patients say? And I said, well, they say I hate myself. And they said, there it is. And
Mm.
then when I showed it to my patients, they said, yeah, that's right. That is the experience. So we went with that. And at first I was a little bit, queasy about it because I thought, wow, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like in your face. But at the same time, I think like this is something that has been stuck in a human being for such a long time. And it almost like it would be this jarring
Yes,
message, like, I get this.
it is. My copy is no longer with me. The lady next to me on the flight back home asked if she could have it for her son
Uh,
because self-hate, unfortunately, is a common thing. And I think the way we argue against it is all wrong. And I learned this from
mhm,
you.
mhm.
So when I hear from someone else that they hate themselves, that they are unlovable, that they're unworthy, that the world would be better off without them, what I do as a good, loving human is I tell them they're wrong.
Right.
And then I learned from you that I am doing
Mhm,
everything wrong in that argument.
mhm,
Talk
mhm.
about that.
Yeah. Well, the problem with highly suicidal patients who are suffering is that in the original versions of treatment was that there were various kinds of therapy. One of the kinds of therapy was the standard type of therapy that many listeners will know, which is the idea of somebody goes into a therapy session and talks to their therapist. Now, when you're suffering and you go into a therapist's office and they're very kind and they listen to you, that feels good. The problem is, let's make the equivalence that what you're trying to do is learn how to ride a bicycle. And then you come into my office and you tell me I need to learn how to ride a bicycle. And I just listen to you. You might then leave and say, Blaise is such a listening, kind therapist. But then you get out of the session, you say, wait a second, I still don't know how to ride a bicycle. So that simply listening to somebody who is struggling doesn't necessarily teach them what to do when they struggle.
Yes.
The other side of therapy is one that teaches, like cognitive behavioral therapy, that teaches somebody what to do. So you say, I need to learn how to ride a bicycle. I say, okay, let's go into the parking lot. This is a bicycle. Get on it. I'm going to teach you what to do. But there was a group of patients that when you just simply listen to them, they would say, okay, that felt really good, but I don't know what to do. And other group of patients who I would say, John, get on the bicycle. And you would say, wait a second, this is really difficult for me for whatever the reason is. And I said, no, 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 look, everybody else can do this. You can do this. Get on this bicycle. And you then feel that I'm not understanding the level of difficulty that you have. So dialectics, which is says that opposite one truth is another truth, is that this is something that you need to do, which is one truth, and it is difficult, which is another truth. So Linehan integrated these two ideas of listening at the one time, and because the person feels listened to, then being able to push the person at the level that they're capable of being pushed, rather than maybe at a higher level. And so, for example, if you know that when you're depressed, that what you want to do is go to bed and stay in bed because you're feeling depressed, but that you also know that by going to bed, you're actually enhancing your depression, and that what you need to do is to get out of bed, call a friend, go for a walk, pet the dog. There's a skill called opposite action, which is to do the opposite of what the maladaptive behavior is telling you what to do. So maladaptive behavior is saying stay in bed because you're depressed. Adaptive behavior is to say do the opposite of staying in bed, which is to get up. So if I were to use that theory, which is somebody comes and says, I hate myself, I would have done what I did, John, was exactly what you did, what you just said that you would do. It's like, no, you don't. Life is worth living. Come on, you got to love yourself. God loves you, if they were religious, or, your family loves you, and all of these sorts of things. And it just did not work. And not only did it not work, they felt worse about themselves when I used that approach.
So we know what does not work, and it's the approach, unfortunately, that is most frequently used. Help us understand more what does. And let's begin by defining what self-loathing is.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what is self-loathing?
So the self-hatred that I was talking about is an enduring and unchanging sense of who you are. So if you think about who you are as a human being, I mean, you could define yourself by your characteristics, by your value system, and all of that. And let's just say, I mean, we use this example, like you say, I'm a male. And I mean, that's just part of my identity. I mean, how easy would it be for me to convince you that you're not a male? Would
Pretty
it be
difficult.
very difficult? Do you think I could?
I'm not sure you could, no.
There's no way in which I could. So what the self-hatred that I'm talking about is woven in to the very fabric of who the person is. They do not believe that they are not deeply, deeply flawed.
Are they born with that?
Exactly not. Exactly not. And that's one of the differences. As opposed to you're male and that's how, you see yourself. They are not born hating themselves. They are not born flawed. But what happens is very early on in childhood, the message is that they're not enough, that they're not smart enough, that they are a burden to the people around them, that the abuse that they receive, the neglect that they receive, the invalidation that they receive is warranted based on the fact that they're not enough. And so the idea starts to consolidate as a child, I am not enough. And again, very few parents want their children to think in this way. But if you're a highly sensitive child and you're being compared to your star older brother who's a quarterback or who's getting all A's, if you're a highly sensitive child, you begin to believe that that is just true about you. And then maybe you're really struggling at school and your parents are frustrated and they display that frustration. And you see your older brother doing really well. And you think, wow, if I wasn't around, my parents' lives would be so much easier. So there's that kind of experience, but there's also experience that many of these children have had, which is physical, mental, and sexual abuse. And even then, it's like I am the one who deserved that because I'm a flawed person. And remember that it's absurd to us as adults that a child should think this way, but we should not be thinking about it from our point of view. We have to understand this is a 5-year-old mind who's trying to understand the world as it is, and that this is the messaging it's receiving.
You and I talked before we hit record about my own experience going through adversity as a child. And there were periods of time after the explosion where I hated my scars, where I
Mhm,
hated the pain, where I hated the
mhm,
stares, but
mhm,
never hated myself. There were
mhm, mhm,
aspects about me, not DNA
mhm,
level. So
mhm.
how common is it for people to despise, to self-loathe themselves as they look in the mirror, as they move through their days?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I mean, I work with this very narrow group of young people, who really struggle in this kind of way. And what happened, what was interesting when the book came out, was all of a sudden I started getting emails from all over the world from people who would say to me, I don't have that condition. I don't have disorder A, B, or C, but I hate myself. And
Yeah,
so what was so revelatory about that is that something that I thought was a little bit narrower than I imagined is actually far more common
for sure.
than I thought. So unfortunately, and again, because this is the first book on the topic, there is no research on this. There's a very narrow research on in a couple of areas, but how widespread this problem is, I don't know. By the emails I get, certainly far more than I would have imagined.
So let me then ask a question around it about how common it is and then why.
Mhm,
You've said before that in rural parts of South Africa,
mhm.
this condition doesn't exist. This
Yep.
mindset doesn't exist. In rural
Yeah.
parts of the United States, it really areas outside of the business and the pace that we live our lives at today, it
Mhm,
does not exist.
mhm, mhm,
So, what do you think it is about the way we're leading our lives today that is
mhm,
causing this to not only arise, but to begin growing to the degree that it is?
mhm, mhm. One thing that I've had other patients who've had almost identical experiences to the patients who did end up with a lot of self-hatred. And I've wondered, well, wait a second, the two of you were sexually abused as children. Two of you were had difficulties in school, maybe learning difficulties. Two of you were teased and bullied at school. One of you went on to develop self-hatred and the other one didn't. And when I started to ask the people who didn't, they had family members, teachers, elders in their community, whatever, that were able to validate, to protect, to love, to reassure that child. And I think that one of the things that happens in many rural areas around the world is that the extended family is often very, very protective. That once we started, destroying the extended family, and I'm using the word destroying intentionally because I understand that there were financial reasons why people would get up and go. But what that did is that then pulled families apart and extended families apart. And then parents had to go off to work and, they weren't there as around as needed to be. And then who were the people who were going to be saying to the kid, hey, kid, you're okay. I'm here for you. I'm here to listen to you.
Absolutely.
Um,
So
yeah,
it's a lack of community. I thought you would talk about technology or nature or mindfulness, and I'm sure it's yes and yes and yes. But
exactly.
what you led with was, man, they're not truly known and truly loved in mass in their neighborhoods right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, listen, technology didn't exist, whatever it was ago. I mean, the kind of technology that we're talking about today, but community has always been protective. It's been the most protective things that we have as human beings have had. And whether it's our communities of faith, our communities of neighborhood, our communities of school or whatever it is, and that the relentless focus on the individuality over community, I think, is a dangerous a trend, and and it really does not lead to any protective factors once you focus on like you have got to get into the best school, et cetera, et cetera.
How do you begin shifting internal narratives? So
Yeah.
if I know, and whether it's extreme
Mhm.
self-loathing or just whispers of despair, how do I begin changing for me and for our listeners and viewers the narrative that we are just walking through our days with, maybe not even knowing that we're walking through our days with?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I started to reflect on over time was, I'm fluent in Spanish. How did I learn to speak Spanish? My mother's Spanish. I love chess. How did I learn to play chess? My dad taught me chess. So when I think about these conditions that lead to the kind of despair that we're discussing here, it's where did I learn this from?
Mm,
That I think that the way in which it begins to shift, it's that it's a learned condition. In the same way that I experienced the love of my mom and I learned that love, I experienced that love. I also learned to be dissatisfied. And what were the circumstances that taught me that? Who were the people that taught me that?
mm,
And, do I want to emulate those people? Is the person who said that I'm not worthy, is the person who said I was never going to amount to anything, they were my teachers of self-dissatisfaction. Are they the people who are my life leaders? Are they the ones who I want to turn out to be like them? And often the answer is no, I don't want to be like them. Okay, but then why are you listening to, their teachings?
mm.
Their teachings are toxic. So I start off with this idea, you start to be unhappy with yourself. And listen, and by the way, I don't want to, I mean, we're responsible for our lives at the end of the day. We're the ones who have to get up, eat well, exercise, not smoke. I don't want to blame somebody else. Hating somebody else to overcome my own self-dissatisfaction is never going to work.
Mm.
It's my responsibility, independent of how I got there. But I do have to think about, and you can do this with compassion, is who were my teachers? Because if we think like, oh, all we have to do is blame somebody else, we're never going to get to healing. Healing is a deeply personal process, but it comes to say, wait, I did get these messages, and they were toxic messages, and I believed that these messages were true. What am I going to do about this?
Well, to different degrees, I think all of us listening to your voice and your teachings feel broken from time to time.
Yeah.
How do we elevate the narrative of our lives? And whether you want to walk us through mindfulness or agency or whatever
Mhm.
the processes that you think might be most beneficial, but what's one thing we can do as we look in the mirror? And then my
Mhm.
follow-up question will be,
Mhm.
and gosh, man, most of us have children or nephews or
Mhm.
nieces or a classroom of kids who look up to us and call us Mr. or
Mhm.
Mrs.
Mhm.
How can we do likewise for them? Not to devalue their opinion of
Mhm.
themselves, but ultimately to educate them and elevate them on their opinions of
Mhm.
themselves. So first
Mhm.
help me do it myself,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then help me be a better dad. How would I have a better view of myself? What's something I
Okay.
can do?
Okay. Well, let's say, for example, that like, I don't know, something happens. It's not your finest moment. Maybe you have a disagreement with your wife. Maybe you have a fight with your kids. Maybe you wish you had done the podcast differently. And there's a moment of
All those things have
dissatisfaction.
happened today already. So yeah, you're
Exactly.
three for three, man.
Um, so now you can go down this one path, which is the path of saying, I'm a terrible husband. I'm a terrible father. I should probably quit this podcast, because like, this is just a disaster. And or you might say, yeah, par for the course. I'm just like, I'm okay, but I'm just not that good. So there's that, it might not be a very loud voice that's telling you you're a terrible human
Right.
being. But I think if you start off with this idea, and that is that right now, maybe I had a disagreement with my kids, maybe with my wife, maybe the podcast didn't go the way I was expecting. There are things that I can control and things that I can't control. If my Wi-Fi goes down, you can't control that. It could be disappointing, but you can't control it. So now, of the things I can control, if I believe that in every given moment I am bringing the best of who I am, and that in any given moment, I am doing the best I can given my circumstances in that moment.
Yes.
Maybe I didn't sleep well last night. Maybe I ate something poorly. Maybe I had decaf instead of fully caffeinated coffee. So first of all, we've got to give ourselves some grace and say, you know what? I honestly, given my circumstances, given everything that's going on, this makes sense. Okay. Now, you can't be satisfied with just that. I also have to be able to do better. But this is where I think mindfulness, contemplative prayer, whatever your tradition is to slow down. Take 3 minutes and just start to pay attention to what actually happened. And you've got to say, you know what? I was doing my best. I'm not happy with my best in that moment. And do I need to go and repair something by saying to someone, hey, I'm sorry I didn't give you my best. But that is not a manifestation of who I am. It's a manifestation of what the conditions were at the time when whatever happened happened. And then you can say, oh, wow, on Fridays, if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's just not my best time to have discussions with my kids because it's been a
Right.
long week, whatever it is. Once you start to pay attention to those conditions, maybe one drinks too much, maybe you underexercise, maybe who knows what it is, but you start to pay attention to those conditions, you can make those changes. But then be careful not to make it that you are somehow flawed. And to say it's because I'm a flawed person. There are things I can improve on, and there are conditions that I can try to change. So it's paying attention and then not really internalizing as a sense of like, this is who I am as an individual. And it gets back then to your other question with, that we're parents and we're teachers. And again, when you see a child beating itself up, saying, I'm stupid. We see this in schools. I'm not good enough. Nobody loves me. As a parent and as a teacher, as someone who loves, these children, our tradition and our normal
Yes.
practice is to just negate what they have said. And what I'm saying is of course it's ridiculous that a child says, I'm stupid or that nobody loves me. That's in most cases, I've seen that that is not true. But rather than just simply telling them that is not true, is to sit with them with deep curiosity and saying, well, that has to be like if somebody said like, I nobody loves me, to sit with them and say, that is a really painful experience. Like, what happened? How did you get there?
Man,
What
how do you
was your
do
think
like
there?
I wish I could do that as clearly as you just said it because I'd be a better husband and a better dad and a better leader. That's not my MO typically. I want to solve rather than
Right.
empathize.
It's so much. We all want to solve. And by the way, when I first started 3 East, and because I was an expert in what I did, I mean, whenever there was a problem on the unit, I'd immediately go to solving. And then
Right.
my senior colleague said, like, dude, you got to listen before you start solving. And so, as with anything else in life, it's a question of practice,
Mm.
practice listening, and it's sort of like, so they say it. And then you say, okay, I actually also told my own kids, I said, listen, guys, I'm going to listen before I problem solve. And they would point out time and time again, Dad, you're doing the same thing over and over again. And until I learned to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to listen. And then I would say to my wife, you know what, I'm going to practice listening. Whenever you catch me problem solving, just tell me to listen.
So in addition to listening,
Yeah.
you've worked with 5,000 young people who thought so little of themselves that they were ready to take their own lives. Like that,
Hmm.
that's the place in their journey that they got.
Hmm.
Then you raise your own 4 kids.
Hmm.
How did seeing this life and death conversation in your work change the way you operated at home as a dad,
Hmm.
as a husband, as a human? How did
Hmm.
it change you and the way you showed up once you left work?
Yeah, I mean, listen, a couple months ago, I went for a walk with my son. We went hiking in the Nevada desert, and I said, like, my son, he's now a social worker, is like, obviously, I clearly influenced your life in so many important ways. I said, full of pride and ego. Tell me all the brilliant ideas that I ever told you. And he said, Dad, like, I have no idea what you told me. I don't know, like, don't drink. I mean, what did you tell me? Like, I don't remember anything. But I always felt safe in talking to you.
Mm,
And it was so powerful. It was just like he always felt safe, like just like and that idea that your child feels safe around you, that what they're going to get is not like some sort of argumentative, angry, parent. And I wanted my children to have left a conversation, at least even if I was dissatisfied or unhappy with their behavior,
yeah.
that they would have known that I had heard them out. And I would still say, yeah, I've heard you out. You still can't drive the car because you were driving around at 16 with a friend in your car. I hear you. You're still not getting the car. So that you can have those discussions. So it's that sense of connectedness. There's that community again, but the connectedness that they have that makes them feel safe.
If every one of our viewers and listeners walked away from our conversation with one truth about themselves, what
Mhm.
would you want them to know?
Yeah. You know, whether you believe in God or you believe in the universe is there are no second-class citizens.
Hmm.
That we're all part of something really, really huge. And I even have my friends who are atheists who say, well, listen, nothing happens afterwards. But the law of conservation of matter tells us that nothing goes to nothing. Our energy goes to something, our biology goes to something. And and we're just as essential as everybody else. A lot of my patients say that they wish they weren't around. I said, well, I wish I wasn't around then. They said, no, but you're important to help people. I said, well, but if you weren't around, who would I be helping? And so like we need each other deeply and we're
Yeah.
all part of something that's essential. And it's just like, it is not in an arrogant, like, oh, I'm the best thing ever. It's just like, I'm essential.
Mm.
I'm
Gosh, that's
essential.
good. Go to the tattoo parlor this afternoon and get that on your right bicep. I am essential. Yes, you
Yeah.
are. So there's listen, man, I took way too many notes from your book and from other
Mm,
podcasts and articles I read about you, but I'm going to ask you about two of them, and then we'll go through
mhm.
our final set of questions, and then
Sounds
I'll let
good.
you dance into the day. So
Thank
one
you.
quote that I wrote down that I loved, I understand this is like almost a motto for you. The
Mm,
motto is don't suffer twice. Tell me what that quote
mm.
means to you.
Yeah, well, one of the things that would often happen is like I'd have so many patients who would say, "I am, that's it. I failed the test. Like I'm never going to get into college." Now, one of two things is true. The person's either failed the test or not failed the test. If they didn't fail the test, then they're suffering needlessly. If they did fail the test, they will suffer when they get the results, but they've also suffered a second time, which is in anticipation of the failure of the test. But if they pass the test, they've suffered needlessly. So if you're going to suffer, suffer when the moment of suffering arises, not before. You don't need to suffer then because you're going to get to suffering.
Hmm.
And so don't anticipate, because what you're doing by anticipating suffering is you're eroding the beauty of this present moment. How
Yeah.
wonderful this moment is, but you're anticipating suffering. Okay, now you failed the test. That's the moment you can suffer. I didn't fail the test. Well, what was the suffering all about? Now, if you're going to worry, use thinking for planning, not for worrying. Yeah.
I also wrote down this one because we could spend at least an hour podcast on it. It's awesome. It's
Mm-hmm.
simple, but I loved it. Once you recognize it was a behavior, you also must recognize it's a choice.
Yeah. So people often say something like, I have this habit of doing something. The second you recognize that something's a habit, it's a choice. If you say, I have a habit of, dating dangerous men, or I have a habit of adding 3 sugars to my coffee. Once you're aware, now it's a choice. And so you can then decide you're going to do something else. I have a habit of staying in bed and not exercising. Okay, now it's a choice. It's not a habit anymore because you're aware. Habitual behavior, you're unaware. Once it's in your awareness, it's a choice.
We have 7 questions that I guide all of my friends through. They're called the Live Inspired Seven. So I'm looking forward to walking through these 7 questions with a new friend. So, Blaise, question number one,
Yeah.
a man who's traveled the world and read everything in it. What's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Probably Thich Nhat Hanh's The Art of Living. And I also love Jonathan Livingston Seagull, I have to say. And just another one which I recently read was Don Quixote de la Mancha. But yeah, I
Wow,
think I think Thich Nhat Hanh, The Art of Living.
very good. And we had Jonathan on our podcast early on. He's a phenomenal guy.
Mm,
What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little kid,
mhm.
but you wish you exhibited more brilliantly today?
I mean, I had an awe that had no cynicism when I was a little kid. I had an awe that had no skepticism attached to it. Everything was just wondrous, and again, very directed by my mom. But I think that as I've gotten older, I'm still in somewhat awe, but I'm much more cynical and I'm much more skeptical. And I have to struggle against becoming very judgmental of the world, the way we see it, the politics of today. And I try not to be, but I wish I could retain that youthful naivety.
Well, I have a book called In Awe that I know I'm sending your way, so get ready for
Oh,
that.
thank you.
If your home caught fire and your
Mm,
children, your wife, any animals you may have are all out safely, and you have an opportunity now running in and grabbing one item, what's
mhm.
that one physical thing you would grab from the burning house?
My mother's Bible.
Why that?
You know, she I don't know if there's more typed words in my mother's Bible or more printed
Wow.
words. She would take so many notes. And so, like, you can barely read the actual biblical text because she's got notes all over the place. But it was such a source of inspiration for her. And it's the only thing I wanted from her, when she passed.
Is it English or Spanish?
Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous Boston day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased,
hmm
who would you like to be seated next to?
Ooh, wow. And it's so incredible and because it's so dependent. I mean, I've had moments when I thought I'd really like to talk to that person under many circumstances. I think probably my grandfather. Yeah, I think he's been the most enduring answer to that question. I'd certainly love to chat with, many people, but I think my grandfather on an enduring basis.
Is
Yeah.
that your mother's father?
My mother's father. Correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's the best advice grandfather or anyone else ever gave you?
hmm hmm and again, I think my mom's advice was to see the Christ, the Messiah in every human being, and that when you look at them through that way, the only thing that you can do is love them. And again, like, I mean, I don't know that I'm a very religious person at all. I would say that I probably am not that religious in terms of a kind of an orthodoxy. But I think that even if we translate it to more secular terms, it's just like seeing the essential nature of just like who a human being is as just like core. But she
Mm.
did love in that kind of way. So I really try to bring that spirit of compassion to the people I can. I don't always live up to it, and I know that I've probably hurt other people, and it's always very upsetting when that happens. But I try to live up to it. It's hard sometimes.
There are two stories that we didn't have a chance to share, and I'm not going to give them as much detail as they deserve, but here
Sure.
they come quickly. There was a woman who thanked you for the mighty work you did in her
Mhm.
for her,
Mhm.
but you also recognized that she had not yet chosen to continue the journey forward to heal herself, and so you
Mhm.
rejected her thank you letter. Like
Mhm. Mhm.
that is very bold.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then there was another woman who you served, and you asked her, and these are young girls, you asked her, "Why are you here?" And she
Mhm.
said, "My mom's making me come." And
Mhm.
you said, "Well, you need to leave because
Mhm.
that's not enough to open up this door for you. You need to
Mhm.
choose it." And so when you talk about seeing the Christ in others, man, in Scripture, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Pick up your mat," and it's a
Mhm.
great line.
Mhm.
Ultimately, it's like, do your part, do your
Mhm.
part. And I
Yeah.
think you do a phenomenal job of lovingly, compassionately, but
Mhm.
boldly challenging
Mhm.
people to do their
Yeah,
part.
because I think that there are traditions where we feel so bad for the lot of other people that we treat them as fragile and we treat them as incapable. And I actually think that's patronizing. I think that that's disrespectful of another person, and that at the end of the day, it presupposes that you're going to be around forever to be able to help them out. But what's kinder is like that they learn how to do this stuff on their own. Now you've got to stand by their side and give them as much of a hand. But if all I've done is made someone dependent on me, I've done nothing. But if
Mm.
I have to, so I'm going to push somebody to say, listen, I'm ready to stand by you, but I'm not doing this work for you.
Two more questions for my friend Blaise.
Here
Blaise,
we
question
go.
number 6 in the Live Inspired 7. What advice would you give yourself at age 20? So if you could go back in time, probably that kid at Notre Dame University at that
hmm
point, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, look, one of the things I wish I could show you, and maybe I'll send it to you a little bit later on. I was put on academic probation my first year at Notre Dame. Why? Because I had a under 2.0 GPA, and my grades were a B in French, a C in math and organic chemistry, and I got a D. What was the D in? Psychology of personality. And the thing about that is sometimes we have these things that happen, and then we say, well, look, clearly I'm going to be a French teacher. I'm not going to be a psychologist. I'm not going to be a mental health expert. Like this moment
Mm.
only tells you about the things that got you to this moment. This moment does not tell you what your future is going to bring. It is so unpredictable, and it's okay. You can let attachment to this moment go.
I got one D in university and it was in public speaking for the business major. And now it is my living, man. So you never
There
know
you
what
go.
this moment
Yeah,
is leading you to. So to
exactly.
my friend, Dr. Blaise Aguirre, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you
Mhm.
like yours to read?
Yeah, I was here. I was here and I was present. More than anything else, I did what I could to live this moment as fully as I could without stressing too much about the future or regrets about the past. So it's I was here in this moment.
Blaise, thank you for being with us in this moment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing a lane that so often is unpopular in many regards, serving the least among us. And thank you for not just asking the question, I hate myself, but
Mhm.
instead inspiring us to begin loving ourselves. You have made a mighty difference, and your best is yet to come.
Thank you, John. I notice my own emotionality as you say that. So thank you.
God bless you, man.
You
My
too.
friends, that is the voice and the wisdom of our friend, Dr. Blaise Aguirre. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.